Hey folks, so today we're continuing into our ancient Rome unit, and we're going to be taking a look this week at the idea of bread and circuses, or spectacle in ancient Rome. And our question will be, what was the significance of spectacle in ancient Rome? So together we're going to take a look at the gladiatorial games, but you then in groups are going to take a look at lots of other spectacles of different sorts that were happening all throughout ancient Rome and kind of the impact of those different spectacles. In terms of political importance, and you do have a note that you can follow along if you want to take some notes down while you're listening. But in terms of political importance, we're really looking at this idea of bread and circuses being kind of like the motto for the Roman Empire. It was all about keeping the people, or the mob as they were called, happy. And so the idea for emperors was bread, feed them, keep their bellies full, and circuses, entertain them. And they thought if they're fed and if they're entertained, then the people of Rome aren't going to care at all about what we as emperors are doing. They're not going to care about military expansion and politics and all of those kinds of things. So the emperors kind of thought that it not only earned them the favor of the people, so they were well liked, but also that it enabled them to do things that the people maybe didn't know about or didn't care about. There were times within the Roman Empire that there were upwards of 200 days of games throughout the year. So, more than 50% of the year would have been, vacation days for various kinds of spectacles and games and festivals. This all starts with that one role we were looking at in the Roman Republic of the aedile. And then later the emperors take on that role. And a lot of aediles and then emperors go into a lot of debt trying to put on really good games, whether it's chariot races, festivals, gladiatorial games, for the masses in order to impress them. Of course, with the gladiators, we're looking at them fighting in very large arenas like the Colosseum. Obviously, those things had to be built as well. So this is all costing lots and lots of money, but it's benefiting the empire, at least under most emperors, because it's keeping the people happy. Here's a mosaic of the gladiatorial games that we're going to focus in on today. So in terms of the history of gladiators, and that clip we just jumped over was a clip from Gladiator, so feel free to watch some of those links that are in your notes. The history of the gladiatorial games really starts out as sort of a religious event. There's definite links back to the Etruscans and this idea that it has Etruscan origins. And if you remember, the Etruscans are those peoples before the Romans, as they're called, come into power. And we're looking at the Tarquin kings and all those guys that they didn't like, but they still do adopt some of those Etruscan customs, like the gladiatorial games. Sorry, I can't speak. At first, the games did not end in actual death. It was just more of a symbolic death of the gladiators involved, but then it evolves into the blood sport that we know it today. So this is the Colosseum, if you've ever seen it in person. Very impressive, even still today, even though it is, of course, in ruins. This is the inside, and if you go to the Colosseum, you can get tours underneath where the floor would have been, because of course the floor would have covered all of these underground barracks. But you can get a tour of those underground barracks. You can see in this section here, not very easily in the picture, but certainly if you were there, you can see that there's this kind of section here that's been cordoned off, and some of those seats still have the actual marble from ancient Rome on them. Otherwise, just like most ancient ruins, the marble has been completely stripped from the Colosseum. So again, it would have been kind of gleaming white. And this is just another view. So you can see those 4 tiers up around the Colosseum. This is actually what it would have looked like in ancient times. Again, very impressive, gleaming white. All of these, 4 levels of arches with statues in them. And then it would have actually had this kind of canvas roof that you would have been able to pull over on really sunny days so that it sheltered, as you can see here, all of the people in the seats. And then it just left the light on the actual gladiatorial games. So very impressive in the ancient world. Impressive today, but much more impressive in the ancient world for sure. So who were the actual gladiators? Gladiators, for the most part, were criminals, prisoners of war, slaves that were bought for the purposes of gladiatorial combat. So someone named a lanista was basically the owner of gladiators, and they would buy really fit, strong slaves, or sorry, it could be slaves, but also prisoners of war, criminals. They would buy them and they would train them as gladiators. So lanistas became very important. There were also professional gladiators who were free men who essentially volunteered to participate in the games because they knew how popular the games were and that they would get fame and prestige and patronage from the emperors, and so some people actually volunteered to participate as gladiators in the games. People who were not criminals who didn't commit a capital offense, so obviously ones who weren't executed, and then were chosen to be gladiators, would have been trained in very private gladiatorial schools or ludi. So it was all about specialization, and based on what you looked like, if you were tall and skinny and agile, then you would be a certain type of gladiator. If you were strong and muscular, then you would again fit a different gladiatorial type. So it was all about trying to see which gladiatorial style and type would fit you the best. So they really did try to specialize gladiators on certain weapons. Also, you could earn your freedom. So if you managed to fight in fights, and again, if we're looking at the possibility of 200 days a year of fights, chances are you're not fighting every day, but you're still looking at a lot of fights a year. If you managed to survive 3 to 5 years, and it depended on the lanista and the ludi that you were part of, but if you survived, you could earn your freedom. So even if you're a criminal, a slave, whatever, you could earn your freedom. There are gladiatorial barracks that you can see if you ever go to Pompeii, of course, the city that was preserved after the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Training a gladiator was also very important. There's a silly little video of an old man training to be a gladiator that you can watch. Feel free to do it. It is very silly, but it does highlight for you a lot of different, sorry, I'll go back. It does highlight for you a lot of different key components about the specialization of gladiatorial training. Like I said, they were trained and specialized. They were trained like athletes. So you got medical attention. You got good meals all day because you had been bought. You had been paid for. So even if you were a criminal, you were treated very well, aside from being trained to fight to the death. You were treated very well because they wanted you to win. They being the lanistas, really wanted their gladiators to win fights over other gladiatorial schools. So you would learn various weapons. Again, if you watch the video, you'll see 2 of the key sort of gladiatorial types that take place in the gladiatorial arena. In terms of armor, and again, if you watch that video, you'll see different types of armor, but each gladiator fought in armor that best suited them. So again, if you're someone who is agile, then you might not have a lot of armor on you because the best thing for you is going to be the ability to jump around and move around. Whereas if you're someone who's really strong and thick and muscular, chances are you're going to be better in one of those gladiatorial types that has a lot of armor on them, so they can't move around a lot, but they are very strong and very powerful. Some gladiators also wear the armor of non-Roman enemies. So it was sometimes about reenacting certain things in terms of those Roman enemies. There were also things called venatores, which were wild animal hunts, and you can see these in the movie Gladiator, though they are very historically inaccurate in that movie. But these are essentially hunting shows. They would take place in the morning, so gladiatorial fights would be usually in the afternoon, but in the morning you might have things like venatores, so this would be a full day event. And they were essentially hunting shows. So you get herds of wild animals that they had caught and brought back from Africa and Asia, which were of course parts of the Roman Empire at this time. Elephants, lions, tigers, all of those kinds of things were hunted sometimes to the point of extinction. And sometimes emperors actually joined in on these hunts as well. So these venatores weren't necessarily they weren't gladiators in traditional gladiatorial armor. It would be more like hunting shows. The Naumachia were essentially naval battles, so they were put on, they could be very, very huge. Claudius puts one on that has like 20,000 men and 100 ships in a man-made lake, but they were put on by the emperors, oftentimes to reenact certain battles. I'm not going to say too much more about it because I want some of you to take a look at that one a little bit later. In terms of popularity, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, gladiators were hugely popular in Rome. You know, they were like modern day, you know, singers or actors. They were like the all-stars of ancient Rome, especially for children, teenagers, and women. Children and young men, so young teenage men, would a lot of times carve graffiti. So you can see graffiti like this, and you can see that these are two gladiators here. This one has fallen down. They would oftentimes carve graffiti to showcase their favorite gladiator. They would be, you know, it's found all over Rome, bathhouses, in, of course, the Colosseum. You can see these graffiti depictions. Here's another one. All over the place. It does get a little bit more scandalous. We are going to be looking at morality and immorality in ancient Rome a little bit later on in the unit. But for women, gladiators weren't just like impressive athletes. It really boiled down to, for a lot of them, being kind of like sex symbols. And so there were certain things like brothels would have specials for gladiators. So you could track down, you know, if you loved Maximus and he was your favorite gladiator, there might be a brothel with a Tuesday night sex special where you could go and you could spend the night with Maximus. And this did happen, and it was not something frowned upon. It certainly was not something that was out in the open as much as, you know, as much as other things in ancient Rome, but it definitely was something that was commonplace. So it wasn't this weird thing that never happened, that no one spoke about. It was kind of this underground thing that people did. There was also this kind of gladiator perfume. So instead of getting an autograph from a gladiator, you would maybe buy a little jar of gladiator perfume. So this here is a strigil, and a strigil is in the Roman bathhouses. When you would clean yourself, you would cover yourself in oil, and then you would scrape the oil off of yourself to clean rather than using soap. And when you scraped the oil off, you would also be scraping off dirt and sweat and all of that stuff. Gladiators did the same thing, except normal people, when they scraped the oil and dirt and sweat off of them, would then like toss that in the garbage. Gladiators, not them themselves, but, you know, gladiator owners would then take that oil and put it in one of these little jars. And then if you're a woman, again, who loves Maximus, you could go to the market and you could buy a little jar of Maximus perfume. And so you would take the oil and you would dab it on yourself, and then you would smell like gladiator sweat and blood and dirt and all of that kind of stuff. So ancient Rome, very weird in terms of morality and immorality. Like I said, we'll talk about it later on, but you've got some weird things going on in Rome. And certainly this is something unique to gladiators. Chariot racers did not get this kind of attention from the Roman public. In terms of winning and losing, gladiators were paid each time that they fought. There is debate about this idea of giving thumbs up or thumbs down. In the movie Gladiator, thumbs down means kill them if the actual fight doesn't result in death. Most historians agree that thumbs up actually meant kill them, and a sideways thumb or a thumbs down meant no or spare them. But there is still debate kind of about that. Essentially, the winner would then receive kind of the victory of their own. So aside from just fame, they could get a golden bowl, a crown, a coin, and you could get a whole collection of those various things. And again, little clip of the Colosseum. So I want you folks to take a look at some of the other spectacles that were going on in Rome, some of the other distractions for the people that the emperors were putting their time into.